What I would like to talk probably about today is the lost opportunities for resolving the Yemen conflict, which I don't think we should really restrict it for the period of 2015 when the coalition war started on Yemen, because actually the conflict started long before that. Some people now, when we see the elements of the existing conflict, will say probably it started in 1962 with September Revolution. At that time, as you know, there was an overthrow of the Imam's rule, and now we have the return of the Imam rules to Yemen. So I think this is the crucial point why there is a reversal, because there were many, unfortunately, mismanagement of 1962 revolution and the outcome of that revolution. The subsequent events that took place in both North and South Yemen has created also a lot of elements for the existing conflict. And therefore, if you read into the history of Arabs and especially tribal Arabs, the feudalistic attitude is there in resolving conflicts. Nobody would like to admit he has contributed to the existing conflict, and a lot of it goes into the blame game, which makes it very difficult for people to come and sit and to compromise. So this is really one of the reasons why the conflict in Yemen has not been resolved. Yemenis' inability really to look to the future, but to remain bound to the past and past conflicts. Since in 2011, with the Arab Spring, there were great expectations at that time. And at that time, Yemen was in the center of that so-called youth revolution or Arab revolution, which may be triggered by youth, but it was hijacked by the classical political parties, who did not really have an agenda to respond to the youth aspirations, but they had their own agendas to take control of the country and therefore really repeat exactly the same system of rule rather than develop governance, democracy, economic development. The GCC initiative, which was actually proposed by the Yemeni government at the time, when it was signed in Riyadh under the auspices of ex-King Abdullah, everybody thought that Yemen was getting out of the bottleneck. And we were all applauded for that achievement, because we were presenting a model to the Arab Spring countries of really going into the future without real revolution, but through the legal institutions of Yemen and according to its constitution. Unfortunately, after signing the GCC initiative, GCC countries were unable to continue the management of that initiative. And the UN fortunately came in to hijack that initiative. The hijacking of the initiative resulted in UN coming in without understanding the basis on which the GCC initiative was actually written. GCC countries knew Yemeni culture, their tribal system, their political system, and their leaders as well. And this is how they actually eventually wrote the GCC initiative. The UN came with their usual prescription for resolving conflicts, which resulted in complicating it, unfortunately. And the major complication of the conflict was Resolution 2216, which was obviously taken without any understanding of what was happening in Yemen, without reading the GCC initiative properly and understood the philosophy of that initiative. and therefore the implementation did not go according to what it was planned for. So this is really one of the first failures in resolving the conflict of Yemen. The GCC initiative was not properly implemented. We moved from there to Kuwait for negotiations. We went first, of course, as you remember, I was involved in that. We went to Geneva for 2 sessions of negotiations, and then we went to Kuwait, where we stayed for about 2.5 months in midsummer. So you can imagine how we felt. But in spite of that, I think a lot has been achieved. The parties have agreed on many of the important issues for resolving the conflict and implementing the GCC initiative as it was planned for. Unfortunately, and this was the second lost opportunity, unfortunately we stuck with the perception amongst the coalition that they are going to win the war militarily. And that before any agreement on signing the agreement, the Houthis have to disarm, move out of the cities, and therefore then the political process can start. The Houthis on their part, of course, and I think legitimately really, refused this idea. They wanted first, they said this is a political conflict. We have to resolve the political side of it before we resolve the military one. And this is how, unfortunately, Kuwait failed, because the coalition or the legitimate government who was taking the blame for it refused to accept any political solution or the basis of a political solution before the implementation of the military side of the initiative or agreement. After that, we went back to the stage we are in. And a new special envoy has been appointed to Yemen. This is now the third one. And my concern now, can we avoid a third failure? Because every time we start with the process, the new special envoy will come and we will start from point zero. They will not really build on the agreements that were already accepted by the parties. They will not agree with the parties on a framework for the resolution of the conflict, and an attempt really sometimes to impose solutions rather than to mediate for solutions. Today, I think we have new developments. I'm sure you are all following. The development in Saudi Arabia after the Iran attack on Aramco and its, I suppose, effect on Saudi attitude towards Iran and towards Yemen. The second was the Houthis also initiative to suspend any more drone or rocket attacks on Saudi Arabia, both of which were welcomed to some extent by the Saudis, and giving an opportunity now for probably resolving the Yemeni conflict. But the elements for resolving the Yemeni conflict, in my point of view, will depend on how the international community, and especially the United Nations Security Council, address the issue of this conflict. The elements complicating the resolution 2216 has to be resolved because they are now an obstacle that the government of Yemen holds to and that will not accept any negotiations unless the Houthis implement 2216. 2216, after 5 years of the war, needs to be revised. Everybody agrees to that, even the special envoys when we talk to them about it. Yet nobody has taken this issue to the Security Council for it to review the situation. And my concern really on this issue is the failures one see in the roles of special envoys in many parts of conflicts in the Middle East. Therefore, a lot of people in Yemen now and the political elite community of Yemen have lost hope in the United Nations Security Council and the role of the special envoy. The developments, let me say, not the plan, but the developments in southern Yemen, which are very important, I think, because they have exposed two things. They exposed the differences between the coalition leaders, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. They have also exposed the fragility of the relationship of President Hadi with the Southerners, and therefore led to the escalation which took place about 6 weeks ago in Aden, and forced Hadi to accept the STC, which is a Southern Transitional Council, which previously he would never accept. Sorry, I have a sore throat, which he will not accept. So now, part of the Emirates' interest in Yemen has been clearly achieved, and that is to have the STC accepted by the legitimate government of Yemen, so that they become partners in any future negotiations for settlement in Yemen. This, in a way, we hope will help, and also providing the grounds for a very comprehensive political situation. But the question one will have to ask really is the acceptance of the STC and Hadi are strategic acceptance or a tactical one? Because, as you know, most of the policies and positions in the Middle East are always tactical. Nobody works with a strategic plan for the future and for resolving conflicts. The American influence in this is of paramount importance. But the Trump administration now is preoccupied with so many things that the focus on the issue of Yemen is not as strong as it should be. I think the United States of America and Europeans, when they talk about Yemen, they all talk from the humanitarian crisis point of view, which is no doubt one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, maybe since World War II. But this is not what should be focused on, as important as it is. Because if the war continues, the humanitarian crisis will continue and will get worse. And therefore, unless a new vision really for a comprehensive political solution in Yemen is achieved, this is going to be a continuation of the war. I must probably remind you here, and I think from this, again, presentation of Mr. Freeman, that in Yemen, the war now has become multifactional. It is no longer Yemeni, and the solution cannot be Yemeni. Now Iran is there, Turkey is there, Qatar is there, apart from the coalition countries. And it is not only a proxy war, but also an area of conflict to settle differences between leaders for either political or regional agendas. And therefore, nobody should really blame the Yemenis or expect the Yemenis that on their own they will be able to end the war. It's now the responsibility of the international community and the United Nations Security Council to see how they can evolve probably a way out. And the exit plan that they can hopefully, I'm saying hopefully, undertake is to build it on the GCC initiative, which had the right elements, I think, if now had an annex or an addendum to it, which will address the changes that has taken place since the war started. This can be sponsored by the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council with the GCC countries and Iran. This will form, as they happened with the Iran nuclear file of having the 5+1, now we can have 5+6 to sit around the table and discuss seriously how to end this war in Yemen, which had a tremendous death toll, enormous destruction, and a great deal of suffering amongst the Yemeni people. If we can work really to think of Yemen now because of its importance in the region first, and of its importance on international economy, as Mr. Freeman said, regarding the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. And I think more important is to prevent it from becoming a haven for extremist groups, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, as a result of a failed state. Although now it's even more than a failed state, it's a destroyed state. This cannot happen now by simply the role of the special envoy, but a direct involvement of the powers who are responsible or have agendas in Yemen. And I hope this meeting will develop some ideas to help in this process. Thank you very much.